Welcome back. Well, right now, several communities in Hoover are mourning the loss of a 13-year-old boy who committed suicide last week. He was a seventh grader at Bumpus Middle School. His tragic story has many parents wondering, how do you talk to your children about suicide and about tragic events? Joining us today is Michelle Essery, a licensed counselor with Full Neurofeedback and Counseling in Hoover. So, Michelle, obviously, this is a difficult time for so many people who knew his family and loved this little boy. And to be transparent, we actually knew the family, and we had to have a conversation with my daughter Anna Claire last night about this. So I wanted to ask you, should parents bring this up, or should they wait for the child to bring up a topic like this if they're hearing it at school?
I think that's going to vary a little bit on the situation and the child. But if you know that your children are coming into contact with this, then it's a good thing to be able to bring it up and give them an opportunity to talk about what they need to talk about. But obviously, bringing it up is going to vary quite a bit with, a 5-year-old versus a 15-year-old and how you're going to have those conversations. But if you know your child is going to hear about this at school, or if they, if let's say were on a sports team with your family, or they lived in your neighborhood, something like that, it would be important to have those conversations then when you know that they're going to come into contact with it.
And I want to get into how to have conversations at specific ages in just a moment, but I did want to ask, one thought I had is, if I bring it up as a parent, it's
Mhm.
going to make my daughter think about it, and it could possibly cause her to commit suicide later. I don't know. That was almost like a natural instinct as a parent. So
Right.
can bringing it up as a parent cause your child to think about it in that regard?
So this is a common fear, right? This is a fear about a lot of subjects, right? Like if I talk to my kids about drugs or sex or suicide or anything, it's going to make them start to think about those things. If we talk about it all the time, then maybe. But if we're bringing it up to open up conversation, it's incredibly healthy for our families and our children, because they need to know that they can ask questions and talk about things, right? If they don't have the freedom to bring up difficult questions, and I say this knowing that it is incredibly difficult sometimes to answer difficult questions, right?
Yeah.
They're going to bring things up. My kids bring things up with me that I want to, run out of the door and not talk about, right? But the reality is we need for them to have a safe place to bring things up. We need that not only so that they can get their questions answered in a safe environment with answers that are going to be appropriate and good for them, but also because that will help them in life recognize that they can go to other people to engage with difficult topics. And so it's a really good idea to allow your kids to ask questions, to be able to have some of these conversations in an environment where it's safe, where you can give them answers that are helpful for them, not harmful.
Okay. Now, I do want to go ahead and dive into how to have these conversations with different age groups. So, I want to start with sort of young children. What
Mhm.
should we do with young children?
Young children are not going to understand the full extent of something like suicide, right? I think we can talk about what happens when somebody dies, right? At an age appropriate level, right? That they aren't there anymore, that their presence isn't with you anymore. If you have a faith based perspective, you can talk about those things. But the idea would be, with any age, you want to answer the question that they're asking. If they have a question about, this person isn't there anymore, what happened to them, you want to answer that question. You don't need to answer all of the questions. You don't need to give a lot of details. You want to be much more vague when you're dealing with young children, because they aren't going to understand somebody taking their own life, or what happens after life, things like that, that are a little more complex.
Yeah. What about with elementary age children?
So elementary age, obviously you're going to go a step further, right? Depending on the child, right? One of my kids loves to ask questions and the other one doesn't as much. I'm going to answer their questions a little bit differently. When they have a lot of questions, you want to, again, give them the freedom to ask those questions. If there's an answer that you feel uncomfortable with, you can say to your kid, this is a really uncomfortable topic. You can bridge that. But when it comes to something like suicide, you can talk about that somebody has died, that they are no longer with you. People like to focus on they had a lot of sadness, or they dealt with something like depression or some kind of illness, and as a result, it led to some actions. That's a really common way of talking about it with younger children.
I like that. Okay. What about with middle school?
Middle school, middle school is a step further. I think that's an appropriate age for you to begin to talk about what is suicide, because that's really when kids begin to be exposed to some of those more significant things. And one of the big important things to consider is at that age, they don't have the parts of their brain to understand the length of consequence. And so what happens often is there's this experience of difficulty with friendships or difficulty in relationships, difficulty at school, not feeling like you fit in. Nobody reaches the point of suicide because they feel like they have any hope. Often it is a place where there's hopelessness, where I don't know how to get out of this situation. And at that age, it's very normal to feel like you don't know how to get out of the situation, but they don't yet have an understanding of this lasts forever. This harms other people, right? That thinking outside of themselves or about the future or about consequences isn't in their heads yet. And so, one of the best things you can do in middle school is to allow them to have the conversations about the things that for them and to tell them again and again that there is hope. You can come to me. You are not alone. And those are, I think, probably the most important things. You can answer their questions about somebody taking their life, but the focus should really be you don't have to deal with things alone. If you're dealing with something alone, come to me, come to somebody you trust, an adult you trust, a friend you trust.
Yeah, good advice there. And our last group, sort of teenagers and schoolers,
Mhm.
how can we have that conversation with them? What do we need to do?
You know, that conversation can be much more complex, right? I'll say the parts of their brain are growing in that can really have the conversations related to those more kind of existential or consequence-based things. And so those are the people, the kids that age, you want them to consider these things. You want them to consider what is mental illness, what is depression, what is suffering, what are those things, and give them a place to talk about it. Similar to middle school, you want them to know that those things that feel like overwhelming pressure don't have to deal with it alone, that there are other options, that that is never a solution. I think one of the very best things, and this is true for all ages when you're dealing with this, you want people who are in the place where they feel hopeless to know that you love them and that you care about them. And that is, I think, if you're expressing with your child what is most important, it is that. And I think in addition to that, recognizing, giving them that place to talk, but also recognizing their pain and their grief. If it's somebody they know, if it's something that they are coming into contact with, they're experiencing sadness related to this, or it feels very real to them in a way that maybe other things might not if it's somebody their own age. And so just being able to give them that place to be able to talk about the questions they have about their own mental health, to be able to give them resources for their own health. There are a few assessments you could do online also at various government websites have a few suicide assessments and mental health assessments that could be really helpful, even just to do with your teenager.
And as we wrap up, if you're having these conversations, or if you're worried that your child might be considering or contemplating suicide,
Yeah.
I know there's a national hotline. Maybe tell
Mhm.
us about some resources and how we can get more information for
Yeah, I
parents.
think I think one of the things to always be thinking about is if you notice with your child, even if they aren't talking to you, right? They aren't coming to you with questions. If you notice that they're withdrawing, that they're feeling sad most of the time, that they're struggling with their friends and their other situations, if they begin to appear hopeless, that's a good time to reach out to. There are counselors, there are hotlines. You could even make that hotline available to them. But again, you are going to be a really good first stop or another safe adult. If you know other people that they could reach out to if they feel uncomfortable talking to their parent, putting that number in their phone, making a plan with them and telling them that, hey, if you feel sad, if you feel hurt, here's a person you should call and talk to. But there are online resources, government websites, like I said, there are assessments, but there's all kinds of hotlines. And I would say when you get to the point where you have these questions, reaching out to a local counselor, somebody they can meet with in person, could be really helpful.
Okay, some very excellent information there. Michelle Essery from Fullwell Neurofeedback and Counseling in Hoover. We appreciate you being with us today. Thank you so much.